The Army and Navy are paying closer attention to the number of small business contractors in government. The Washington Business Journal reports the director of the Navy Office of Small Business Programs, Jimmy Smith, says even though spending has stayed the same, the number of small business industry partners has fallen. Frank Kendall, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, former Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. Frank, welcome. It's great to talk to you again. That dichotomy is something I'd like you to help me understand. Participation level lower, but percentages higher for small business than ever. What's the differentiator there?
Well, what I think it means that what's happening is that money is flowing to small businesses as a percentage at a reasonable rate. But then the number of businesses that it's going to has declined. There could be several reasons for that, Francis, but I think the most obvious one is that some of those businesses don't exist anymore and that others have picked up the work. So that's telling you that there's less competition. The other thing that could be a factor in here is merger and acquisition, where there's been some consolidation. So that's a possible factor also, but I'd be inclined to think that the first one that I mentioned was more likely and probably more prevalent.
What's your sense of what the level of involvement should be in on the department's part in sustaining that? I know that for a long time the department has paid very close attention to what happens at the top of the defense industrial base structure. It strikes me that maybe the attention at the lower end of the structure has not been as close.
There's always been some attention to the lower end of the structure. We had a program in the Obama administration called tier to tier, sector to sector, T2C, S2. It was basically about paying attention to the entire supply chain. The thing that's changed since then that I think is very helpful and should be helpful to the department is there's some really good analytical tools available right now based on artificial intelligence and data analytics, essentially, that allow you to monitor your supply chain much more effectively than we could with the tools that we had. So I don't think it's new to pay attention to this. A lot of the initiatives we had in funding, either through VPA, for example, to the industrial base, were going to smaller businesses that were critical links in the supply chain. But I think there's a much better spectrum of things that can be done now, and much better way to analyze the entirety of the supply chain and try to take corrective action when you need to. The other thing that I think needs to happen, and I think that there needs to be greater cooperation between the government and the primes. The primes pay a lot of attention to their supply chains. They're dependent upon them, and they monitor them carefully. They're often the first to understand when there's a problem. I think closer collaboration between the government and the primes would be beneficial also.
In what way? How should they collaborate better? What's the information exchange? What is the level of awareness into the business of the other side? What does that look like, Frank?
I think when a small business is going to be in trouble for some reason, and it's important that that business stay viable, that there's a range of things that can be done. Some of them can be done by the prime, some of them can be done by the government. Traditionally, the DPA has been used fairly selectively. This administration has used it in some cases, and I think under the COVID label, gotten a little bit of criticism for where it sent the money. But I don't have a problem with that. I think that there are parts of the supply chain that have been effective, and it's appropriate to try to help them out. The thing I'd be concerned about is whether that's being politically motivated at all, or whether it's strictly a what's good for the government and for the country basis. So there are things that can be done there, and there are things that industry can do. If a member of the supply chain is basically supplying only one of the primes, then the prime can step in, and there are a range of things that primes can do. I've seen primes I've worked with do this, where they, in some cases, will buy the business. In some cases, they'll loan it money. In other cases, they'll give it more favorable terms that help its cash flow. So there's a range of tools available, and I think they have to be used in a way that's tailored to the specific situation. And again, though, if the government and industry can collaborate on this, I think it can benefit everybody.
What's your sense of how well those companies at the smaller end of the supply chain are doing at saying to either the primes or the department, hey, we're struggling, we are in trouble and we're at risk here, and we want to let you know of that ahead of time?
My impression is that those channels are open. I'm not sure they're always used. I'm not sure the lower tier suppliers in particular understand that those channels are open or how to use them. So I think improving the communications on both sides would probably be helpful. And I think government needs to reach out perhaps more than it is. But I think the government is from my understanding, has people actively working this. They're trying to find out where there are problems and take corrective action where they can. And I applaud that. I think they're doing the right thing there.
You've used that term corrective action a couple of times. What corrective action makes the most sense in the context of the original part of our conversation, Frank, about the amount of money going to small businesses staying steady, but the number of those businesses declining?
Yeah, I think you have to look deeper and you have to look at the details to sort out where that's a problem and where it isn't. In some cases it will be, in some cases it won't. It's the sort of indicator that makes you dig deeper. It by itself, it doesn't tell you all that much. I think it's inevitable that under the situation we're under right now, particularly companies that are supplying both the commercial aerospace as well as the defense side of the house, their commercial side may have very well dried up completely. So the degree to which they're dependent upon that makes a difference in whether they can endure it and get through this all right or not. Again, you've got to go work the details. It takes a fair amount of effort. And one of the best things you can do is for people to kind of raise their own hands and say, I need help and of this type. It generally comes down to cash flow. If companies aren't getting the money in, they can't pay their bills and they're going to go under. So you have to figure out a way to relieve that. You can do it with contracts that give them cash flow through contract. You can find ways to do it through loans. One of the things the government has done is move the progress payment number from 80% to 90%. The intent of that was that those accelerated payments would flow down to the sub-tier suppliers who needed that money the most. The big primes have access to capital. They can weather this pretty well, but small companies don't. And the intent of that increase in progress payment rate was to help the smaller companies. I only have anecdotal evidence for how successful that's being. I think it is partially successful, but I think it's something the government needs to monitor, make sure that money's getting where it's intended.
Frank Kendall, thanks very much as always. Terrific insight.
Thanks. Good to be with you, Francis.